And Caitlin, we'll hand it off to you and let you get started.
Awesome. Well, yeah, while I pull that up, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to talk to you more about how we're thinking about using data and just kind of broadly thinking about data and the programs that support social entrepreneurship. Let me go ahead and pull this up. Yeah, so very broadly, kind of the role in data in social innovation and entrepreneurial program leadership. Um, just kind of giving my perspective off the bat, you'll see my disclaimer. I am not a data scientist. I'm not a data engineer by any means, but in my current roles, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, I'm really using data or trying to use data to help run and continuously improve upon effective programs that support, number one, social entrepreneurs who either are in the process of creating or who have already created businesses that are addressing social and environmental challenges. Obviously, most recently that climate tech and climate action, and two, underrepresented small business owners, women and women of color in particular. Also, as I move forward, please feel free to jump in with questions. I'd love for it to be interactive. And you'll notice that I tend to be very candid. So I'll be bringing up a lot of the challenges that exist. There's a lot of opportunities in social innovation and entrepreneurship more broadly. And this kind of data piece and data-minded individuals are always kind of in demand for the startups that we work with. And you'll learn a little bit more about why that is. So to start, I'll tell you just a little bit more about myself and my trajectory into social innovation and entrepreneurship, kind of how I got here. And then I really want to focus on three super broad use cases of data and with just some of the examples and insights from my work. So that'll be acquiring and retaining funders and really using data as a proof of impact for different programs, as well as kind of traction from the startup perspective. I'll talk about operational excellence and this idea of continuous process improvement within the programs that I work in. And then from the startup perspective, really looking at B Corp standards, as well as kind of the sustainability or the sustainable development goals from the UN. And then the third is more around ecosystem collaboration and two kind of big issues there, which is around standardization and ownership of data. So just elaborating on my background, I am a Syracuse University alumni. Believe it or not, I studied music industry and my master's degree is in arts leadership administration. So very much focused on an MBA type degree in the creative field. So not technology and not data specific at all. As I mentioned, I am the Associate Director of Climate Initiatives at Columbia Technology Ventures. So again, a little bit of a Russian nesting doll. Again, Columbia Technology Ventures is the tech transfer office of Columbia University. And as a whole, they're really focused on commercializing tech out of the university. But I'm part of that strategic initiatives group that extends far beyond the university. So we are assisting and helping to commercialize and equitably employ promising climate technologies, both in New York State as well as startups out of New York State, so international and out of state, who are looking to establish a presence in New York State as well. So under that umbrella, there are four programs that we currently run. They are the Climate Tech Expertise Network, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a little bit. There's the Climate Justice Fellows Program, which is helping, again, equitably employ and have underrepresented individuals who want to establish a career in climate technology. Verizon, the telecommunications company, has us supporting some of the alumni of their programs in the climate space. And we also have a startup officer program, which is funded by donors of Columbia University. In addition to, that's my full-time job. I'm also on the advisory board of WISE. That's the Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship. That's supporting those women and women of color who are looking to start small businesses locally here in Syracuse. I am a certified NSF I-Corps instructor, which again, I'll elaborate on a little bit, but that's the National Science Foundation. And then just some of the relevant certifications related to data that I hold are, I'm a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, and I'm also a certified practitioner of the Predictive Index, which is a digital tool we use for team building, specifically leadership teams of the startups in our program. And I actually brought it to my board experience at WISE, which I'll share in just a little bit. Prior to that, I was a former director of operations for the Tech Garden, which is a high growth tech business incubator here in Syracuse. And I was also an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship at SUNY Oswego. Columbia gets a little grumpy if you try and moonlight and teach at other academic institutions. So we did stop adjunct teaching, but it's a part that I really enjoyed. And then personally, I'm a proud wife and I'm a mom of two dogs and one human. And here's my squad. I'm very proud of them. So especially we have a dog lover in the crowd. So those are my two, and they're quite sweet. So looking at my origin story, and it's a strange one, as I mentioned, I was a music major, and in 2010, I was a sophomore sitting in my dorm, and it was the big Haiti earthquake, which was really kind of the catalyst of, like most college kids, I was, ambitious, and this was a huge tragedy that really destroyed this community, and I wanted to do something about it. So I was surrounded by, talented musical people, and basically said, all right, everybody, I'm going to put together this event. We're going to raise money for charity, and we donated that to Haiti relief efforts. You can see a picture of that event on the right-hand side. And for those who, know Syracuse University, it was a Friday night at Syracuse, and it was also snowing. It was a giant snowstorm that day. So I was pretty convinced it was going to be a flop, but we got a great turnout, which was nice. But this was really kind of the catalyst to thinking about what it means to have a career in social innovation. So kind of the impact of that, I did end up starting a student venture, and later just really fell in love with the entrepreneurial opportunities on campus. I joined what was then the Idea Connectors, which were representatives from each college on campus, to really, illustrate that entrepreneurship and innovation wasn't just happening in the business school. There was a conference on campus called the Emerging Talk Conference where student venturers you could pitch. And I remember specifically this being the moment that I decided, like, this is for me, right? I have really ambitious colleagues around me who have really interesting technologies or business ideas that they're working on. I ended up winning some seed capital at that event for my idea. So I was just really amped up about kind of what entrepreneurship was. I was excited about using innovation and creativity to make a positive impact on campus. And that led to a fellowship from the Kauffman Foundation, which was the Kauffman Entrepreneurship Engagement Fellowship, which is not rolling off the tongue by any means, but again, just really kind of the art of stumbling from music industry person. I knew I wanted to be in business. I knew I could use art and music for a good cause. And then I was developing the language around social innovation and entrepreneurship, which led me down this path. But that was kind of my starting point, my origin story for that. So as I mentioned, the first use case I want to talk about is acquiring and retaining funders. So I used to say, as I was learning, there's really no mission without money. There's no purpose without profit, which would really frustrate kind of the nonprofit management students at Syracuse University. But money is necessary to make a positive impact. You cannot run a business, or in this case, a program on good intentions alone. So that's where, the acquisition and retaining funders is crucial for the programs that I work for, as well as the startups that I serve. Just at a really high level, I don't need to get into fund development strategy, but for the sake of context, the entrepreneurial programs that I work with are usually housed within an economic development, government, or academic institution, right? So obviously I'm part of Columbia. Previously, the Tech Garden is part of Center State CEO, which is an economic development institution. And for these types of programs, we're going to be looking for funding opportunity announcements. So kind of federal or state government agencies announce, a competitive application for funding, a discretionary award of some kind. So we are funded by NYSERDA, which is a state agency, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. So they're funding 2 of our 4 programs. And then in addition to these federal and state agencies, our types of programs might look for funding from donors and corporations as well. So I mentioned, Verizon as funding the 3rd program, and then Donors of Columbia funding the 4th. From the startup perspective, depending on their stage and type of business model, they're going to be looking for funding from grants, from private capital, strategic partners, as well as debt. And all of this to say, this is mostly not-for-profit entities when it comes to the types of programs that I'm in, which comes with kind of the stereotypical challenges, which is primarily small teams doing a million things on a tight budget. So those are some things to consider. So of the 4 programs that I run, we have a team of 4 people. So my boss is the director, I'm the associate director. We have a program manager and a program administrator running, 4 multi-million-dollar programs. It's fine. We're doing fine. So again, this is just kind of a high-level perspective on the types of money that data will help us to acquire as well as maintain so that our programs can exist. As I mentioned, one of the 4 programs that we look at is the Climate Tech Expertise Network. We actually just went through the process and was able to secure $4.5 million over 3 years with the opportunity for 2 2-year extensions. And we did that through a PON 5486, which is a program opportunity notice. And again, that is one of those funding announcements that came out of NYSERDA. So NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, funds a lot of different types of programs for different stages of business. So from a data perspective, one of the things that we really consider is eligibility and kind of the changing dynamic of that data. So the person's location, we are only able to offer the full scope of our services to companies in New York State or have a presence in New York State, which NYSERDA defines as 1 full-time employee. They have to apply with a greenhouse gas emission reduction potential. So calculating that through different tools. Like I said, they have to have that full-time equivalent as well as program participation. So for example, if there's an out-of-state company that is participating in a NYSERDA-funded New York State accelerator of some kind, they would temporarily be eligible for our full scope of services. And if not, we have a smaller scope of services. But again, from a data perspective, as all of those things change, so a company moves into New York State and then could have access to the full scope, or vice versa, moves out of the state, and then that eligibility requirement would change. Obviously, if they hire somebody in state, we would need to keep track of that. Program participation will come to an end. So from a programmatic understanding that data does change, and it is very hard for us to track that change in data. Similarly, we also have a lot of reporting requirements, as nonprofits typically do, or as anybody does to their funders, for profit or not. So with NYSERDA, we are contractually obligated to report on specific data, which of course informs how we set up our operation to collect that data. And we use Airtable is the tool that we use to collect that data. I did not choose that tool, but it is the tool that we use. And the process really comes in the form of, applications, so capturing point in time data at the time of they apply. And then we have monthly surveys ongoing. And then we'll supplement any of that data through word of mouth from any other mentors they're working with in the ecosystem, as well as different partners, which could take the form of, a business incubator that they're a part of, or an accelerator program that they're a part of. So again, this is how, they are going to request us to have proof of impact for our program. So here's just an example of the data that they want us to track, particularly client-driven metrics. So any grants or prizes that are not NYSERDA-based, they don't like to pay for us to help them get more of NYSERDA's money, so they don't want us to track that. Investor funding above and below certain thresholds, pilot projects with partners in the ecosystem if their technology is ready, sales and customer agreements, strategic alliances and mergers and acquisitions, or M&A, sales and revenue figures, and then kind of New York State specific stuff because it's a New York State agency trying to fuel economic development there. But any pilot projects that are paid and in New York State, if they open an office in New York State, or if they join a New York State incubator or accelerator program. So a lot of our operation and a lot of our surveys and reporting is figuring out how to capture this data on an ongoing basis. So here's, one of the couple of issues with that. First, we are dependent on startup survey completion rates, which are terrible for a variety of reasons. Startups are extremely busy, and even though it would take maybe 10, 15 minutes a month, there's just such a laundry list of to-dos that it's very hard for us to get them to complete these surveys in any consistent way. Number 2, a lot of this or some of this information is considered confidential, particularly sales numbers or pilots or strategic partnerships that have non-disclosure agreements in place. They're obviously not as willing to share that information with us. So it's hard to capture that. But again, we're constantly battling. Our funder is expecting that as proof that we are doing a good job. So that goes into the retaining your funder, right? So as I mentioned, we have secured a 3-year contract and we have the opportunity for 2 2-year extensions. But to secure those extensions, that requires us to be able to capture this data in an effective way. And then one of the questions that's coming up a lot lately related to number 3 is is this the data we should be tracking at all? Robert, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not muted. So I feel like a bit of an idiot here. I'm having a hard time getting my hand around the basic business model of what you're doing
Sure.
and what your organization is doing and what you're doing
Yeah,
specifically.
sure. I can definitely take a step back for that.
Can I try and because this is how I'm understanding it right now
Sure.
is you work as part of Columbia University to
Mhm.
figure out how grants are performing.
No.
Okay, I don't understand.
Sorry. And it's as I get to in later, there's a lot of jargon in our industry, in entrepreneurship in particular. So I work for Columbia University. My department as a whole is supposed to commercialize technologies from IP that is developed within Columbia University. But my group is a strategic initiatives group. Because climate action is important to Columbia University, we are helping to effectively commercialize startups who have climate technologies.
Okay, so there's someone out there in their garage and they have this great idea
Mm-hmm.
and they have little capital. And Columbia somehow, maybe through gate grants from the state or the Fed or private donors,
Mm-hmm.
has this program that's benevolently helping these people. Is there something in it for Columbia?
In this case, NYSERDA, the state agency, a New York State-based agency, has paid Columbia University to administer the Climate Tech Expertise Network. What's in it for Columbia is, alignment. They have just created the climate school at Columbia University. It's great PR for the university. And we do have Columbia University-based climate technologies in our program as well. So for those who are a fit, we are assisting those. But otherwise, we don't take equity. We don't charge money. So there is we get to be the good guy a lot.
Yeah, I'll be quiet for this because I think I just got it. Is you're out there and other companies might have these projects that they work on, but your projects are other fledgling companies that you're trying to get off the ground. And then you step back and you let them do their thing.
Exactly right.
That's very exciting. Okay, thank you for explaining.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, it's really, it's a lot of fun. So as I said, I come from a business incubator background where, we're kind of fighting for our piece of the world. We get to collaborate with all the accelerators and incubators across the state. It is our job to help climate technology companies get up and running. New York State has a lot of goals related to that. The UN has goals related to that. So we're just trying to get them and their technologies in the market.
Thank you.
Sure. So looking at, again, retaining funders and acquiring funding, I mentioned that NYSERDA has essentially given us this list of, I want you to report on these metrics from the startups that come through your program. So obviously we're going to figure out how to get this information because that's what our funder asked for. But going to that third point, and I've talked to other people in the ecosystem, is this the best thing? Is this what we should be tracking for these companies? Especially that social innovation piece, right? For businesses in general, yes, it makes sense to understand what their revenues are, to understand what investment they've gathered, to understand the grants that they've received. But for social enterprises, this seems just to be the easier metrics to track because they are, right? Impact metrics are much harder. So these types of metrics, right, that I'm showing does not necessarily indicate that our program is successful, for example, right? These are not testimonials related to the projects in our program. It also doesn't mean that the startup is making the social or environmental impact that they aspire to as a social enterprise. Really, we're asked to track money because that's something very easily trackable. And I'll circle back to impact metrics a little bit later. Any questions before I move on?
This has got to be a fascinating job. There's so much you could do here. Holy cow.
It's a lot. It is a lot of fun, I have to admit. So that's the programmatic side in terms of, again, getting funding, retaining funding. Now I want to switch roles. I mentioned that I'm a certified National Science Foundation I-Corps instructor. I've also served as an industry mentor. So the National Science Foundation is a grant funding agency. So they do offer a couple different types of grants for early stage companies as well. But this Innovation Corps, this I-Corps program, is a training program for founders, and they're there to collect and analyze data that validates business model hypotheses. So the people who are starting companies who might go through an I-Corps program are typically deep tech founders, highly technical founders, a lot of PhD types. And so they're usually very technical or product focused. And this is kind of their first step into understanding the larger business model around that technology. So again, from the perspective of how do you leverage data to get funding and retain funding, a wildly oversimplification of this process. But for these young companies, if you're able to articulate your business model and the validation of that model by going through a program like I-Corps, that's how you can acquire capital, whether that is grant funding or the typical investment, whether it's pre-seed, seed, or Series A plus for private capital. So again, a gross oversimplification, but this is the beginning of how you can articulate and the validation of your business model. And then that step forward, when you're executing that validated business model, that's how you're providing enough value to the customers that you're earning that revenue. Once you're earning revenue, you have more traction that can attract later stage funders. So chickens and eggs and such, but it's, it really starts with having the data around your business model to be able to attract the type of funding depending on stage. So for the Innovation Core program, they're using the business model canvas to collect that data. And the process of collecting that data, they assign, a minimum of 100 plus interviews. So getting out into the field and actually talking to these potential customers, potential users to inform and validate that business model. So here's my observations, again, putting on my certified I-Corps hat. So many of these startups are hammers on a nail hunt. So when they have their baby that they've made in this lab, whether it's a piece of technology or an intellectual property of some kind, they go out to do these interviews and they don't kind of do the best practices of customer discovery, which is they're not there to sell their solution. They're not there to ask yes or no questions. And they're also not there to really kind of lead their potential customer, kind of future-oriented questions. Like, would you buy this? Because oftentimes they'll answer yes, but when push comes to shove and it's on the market and they're charging money, the actions don't ever equate to the words. So I've seen a lot of startups who don't abide by best practices of discovery, which leads to bad data, right? So they come back saying like, all these people are super excited about my technology, but that's, people just try not to hurt feelings more often than not. The second thing I see, again, that's from the social enterprise space, is social innovators are leaning very heavily on that good intentions. So, I'm out there trying to save the environment. I'm out there trying to, help whatever group of people, overcome this challenge. But as business owners, as startup founders, they often fail to focus on validating a unique value proposition for a specific group of customers. So as I said in the bottom here, a desire to save the world or even a really interesting, amazing piece of technology will not lead to funding or retaining funding if you don't have the data to know who your customers are, what or why they would buy your solution, or what pain point or opportunity you're solving for, and what they're willing to pay for it, right? So if that business model doesn't have the data to validate those hypotheses, you're not going to get funding, not from a grant agency and not from private equity investors as well. So super high level in terms of funding and retaining funders. Any questions before I move on to operational excellence?
I have one in the chat.
Let me see. The smallest size startup I've worked with that has a full-time person dedicated to pursuing grants, setting aside private donors, but I suppose we could include that if it's the only way to get an answer to this. Very, very rarely. I don't think any of the startups I work with typically have a person solely dedicated to pursuing grant opportunities. So usually they're working with resources like our program. They will outsource grant funding to, there's grant funding, grant writing agencies that also can give them a funding menu. Here are the grants that are relevant to your business. And then they can pay them moving forward. So very, very rarely are there full-time grant people at the startups that I work with of any size. And even, super mature startups who are, Series B and beyond.
I'm at a nonprofit with about 800 employees, and probably at about the 600 mark, we got a full-time grant writer. And I prepare data for the grants. So I kind of get where they're coming from.
Oh
Wonder
yeah,
how
so
normal
that's
that was to have a grant writer. I guess not that normal for these places.
yeah, no, and that's super relevant skills and something that I think startups would love to have. They just typically don't have the budget to bring that in-house. So every employee of a startup company is crucial, and they're usually wearing a billion different hats. So your grant writer at a startup is also your CFO, is also the coffee maker who cleans the floors, and et cetera, et cetera. You get my point. So yeah, it would be, and it's also those grants are typically very on the very earliest stage of startup. So they're usually graduating from grants as they are testing out their business concept into private capital. So once they get the grants to get their technology validated, they're either going to move into private investment to scale their operations, or they're going to be earning enough revenue where they don't need to pursue grants anymore.
Oh, I see. So they grow out of the grants.
Yes. And I work with for-profit. So all of the companies that I work with are for-profit in their social enterprise, where they might equally value the impact and the financial impact as well as the social or environmental impact. But yeah, these are not nonprofit organizations that I work with. So that might be slightly different.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So looking at operational excellence, the question I ask is, what does it mean to run a successful entrepreneurial program or a startup? And then I want to take a look at a couple sources to inform that impact metrics piece that tends to be missing. And just to look briefly at operational excellence, it's not something that I had learned about until relatively recently in my career, but it's just an approach to business management, and it emphasizes continuous improvement kind of across all aspects of that business. But what's interesting to me is that it's really a blend of lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, and Kaizen. So lean really, systematically minimizing waste and maintaining productivity. Six Sigma is improving processes and minimizing defects in that process. I mentioned I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, so that's combining those first two. And then the Kaizen piece is continuous improvement, but is really emphasizing teamwork, giving ownership to proactively make changes in your business. So kind of that human element. So they gave this pyramid to kind of illustrate that. So it's just a really interesting concept and a really interesting culture shift that, I think I've been lucky enough to see in my own organization and that we often emphasize in the startups we work with as well. So going back to that kind of customer discovery piece for a startup, kind of many view this discovery and validation and search as a project. So I do my 100 interviews and I'm done, when in actuality, it really needs to be built into their operation. And that's something that I have that conversation a lot. And it's really important for startups to get good data as fast as possible, because that speed is your only competitive advantage against the larger companies who are, much better resourced. So for the startups, the longer they spend in that search phase, trying to do their customer discovery, validate their business model hypotheses, the longer that they don't follow best practices and get bad data, the higher the likelihood that they're not going to make it through, in the startup world, the valley of death, which is kind of making the jump from a validated business model to early commercialization and to scale. So if you're burning through your runway because you're, again, not getting that good data or not getting it fast enough, you likely won't survive as a company. Brutal but true. So that's one way, kind of using that piece and building it into a continuous improvement for a startup, because it really is a life or death for that company. So one of the examples I want to use in my career and a program that I think is using OpEx pretty well is WISE. So Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship. Again, if you're not from the area, you haven't heard of it. It's a designated women's business center, so funded by the SBA. Again, our funding coming from government agencies. It's also a New York State Entrepreneurship Assistance Center, and that's funded by Empire State Development. So this is a program of Syracuse University, and it's housed within the Whitman School of Business. So again, a lot of rushing nesting dolls, but you're seeing kind of where we're getting our funding. We're associated with an academic institution, like I said, but they're really using data in some cool ways. And one of them is to continue to strengthen and build the advisory board that I mentioned I'm a part of. The other is to improve kind of the delivery of their services. And again, they're assisting women-owned small business owners or aspiring women-owned small business owners. And they're using that data to help effectively address social inequalities, to be able to map areas of need and to develop targeted interventions for women locally who would fit their thesis. So the results of that process for them is they are able to expand their footprint. So they're reaching out to different counties here in central New York that don't have that resource available by kind of going through that process. They also are adding services for later stage business owners. So traditionally, they've done very much kind of the 101, 102 types of skill building for aspiring business owners or current business owners. What they're finding now is that there are more mature women business owners who have more specialized needs, but are much further along. So by gathering that data, they're now going to be in a better position to serve those. And like I said, optimizing board participation. So how are they, for anybody who's worked in nonprofit, that board management piece is typically a big challenge. So WISE is trying to figure out, how do I actually leverage the strengths of my board and make sure that we're aligned with the strategic initiatives of WISE? So one of the ways that the company has done that was using a tool called Predictive Index. I mentioned that I'm a certified practitioner, and this is a workplace personality assessment tool that we have used to build executive teams for the startups who've come through the program at the Climate Tech Expertise Network. So really, this behavioral assessment that Predictive Index offers helps teams to better understand what's driving their behavior specifically at work. So for a company like WISE, making sure that their business strategy is aligned with your talent strategy. So companies of all sizes all over the world use this tool, and it doesn't have to just be your board. It can be your employees. It can be certain departments. So what you're looking at on the bottom is actually my result. So each person has a pattern that's unique to them, but all of them fall within 17 different personality profiles. I won't get too into the weeds on it, but again, this is just a high-level tool. The 4 different factors that this tool looks at is first dominance. So that A is dominance, and it's the desire to exert one's influence on people or events. On the independent side are people who are very behaviorally driven to have that type of influence, whereas on the more collaborative side, they're not as behaviorally driven to do so. You can see that I'm on the more independent side, so I guess I like to have some influence on the people or events around me. The second indicator is extroversion, and this is simply the drive for social interaction with other people. If you're familiar with kind of Myers-Briggs definition of introversion and extroversion, that's much more nuanced. Again, this is a behavioral drive, and you would guess that people on the sociable side are very behaviorally driven to seek out that interaction, whereas the reserved are not. I'm somewhere in the middle, leaning more towards reserved. C is the patience drive. It's the drive for consistency and stability. So those on the driving side, where I am, like a little more variety in their day-to-day. They also like to work at a faster pace compared to the steady side, who kind of like to work at a more methodical pace and work on kind of some more consistency. They appreciate knowing what to expect. And then D, the 4th factor is called formality. And this is the desire to conform to rules and structure. So those on the precise side like knowing the rules and abiding by them. I am a rule follower. And that's compared to the more flexible side, who are just much more comfortable with ambiguity, and they don't need those rules or that structure in place to succeed. So long-winded, my personality profile is that of a strategist, and WISE was able to leverage this tool through my subscription to try and take a look at what our board dynamic was. So actually what I will do in a moment is, these were the questions that we were asking as a board, right? Do we have the right board in place? How could each member contribute in a meaningful way? What we found was we needed to better balance our strength and excitement around new ideas with the execution and continuous improvement of existing services, and we needed better communication overall. And so the insights of the process is that we are relatively strong when it came to 3 of our top 5 priorities.
I'm sorry. Sorry, my dog.
That's
okay.
So we were relatively strong as a board for 3 of our top 5 priorities, but we could really improve board representation in one of the 4 quadrants. So just quickly, and I think I pulled it up, This is the predictive index. These are the results. This is our entire board. So looking here, you will see each little dot here, each data point is one of our personality profiles. So all of these personality profiles fall into one of 4 quadrants on this work styles matrix. Innovation and agility, as you might guess, are going to be personalities that are focused on pursuing new innovations. Results and discipline are kind of the executors of the group, focused on results and goal achievement. Process and precision, you might guess again, are going to be very organized and efficient, working on process and predictability. A lot of our engineering types or financial types tend to be down there. And then our teamwork and employee experience are really focused on kind of the company culture, so collaboration, relationship building. So those are the 4 quadrants of this matrix, and each purple line represents one of our top 5 priorities. So again, what we found is down here in results and discipline, where 2 of our top 5 priorities are, you see 3 names. So Megan is the director of Wise, Carolyn is the marketing person at Wise, and then you have me there. So of the board, I'm the only person in results and discipline. So for Wise's perspective, this is a tool to say, okay, as we're attracting new board members, maybe they do the behavioral assessment, and we might need more personalities whose behaviors align with this particular quadrant. So just a tool that they thought was valuable, and I'm glad that we could kind of go through that process with them.
Caitlin, for that in particular, is it like a paid tool, or do they have like any like open source like components to it?
It is a paid tool, and it's
Okay.
something that I have through my work with Columbia Technology Ventures. So when I joined the board and they were talking about, again, I think they're doing a great job of trying to make more data-informed decisions to operate and kind of continuously improve. I actually offered to use my subscription to do this project, but it is paid. I think Predictive Index has different packages depending on the size of your company. So if you have a smaller company, obviously it's less expensive. If you're a giant for-profit, it'll be more expensive. But a tool that we use to build executive teams with startups, but was able to bring it in for this particular use case as a board member.
Very cool.
So we had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, any questions on kind of maybe how we use data for operational excellence before I just delve a little bit into impact metrics? Okay. So as I mentioned, we are using our funders' recommendations to track certain data points that may or may not be the right data points to track, but that's how we prove our value, and therefore that's how we're going to track them. But this larger question around how can social entrepreneurs really measure the impact they're intending to have, and that extends beyond kind of the investment that they've raised or the revenue that they've earned. There are really 2 sources that I'll just focus on today briefly, just to say here are the North Stars that I know of that I think are helpful for social entrepreneurs in particular. The one, of course, are going to be the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I don't know if people are familiar with this one, but it's basically the UN saying, if we're going to develop as a world by 2030, here are the goals that we would like to hit. And who am I to argue with the UN? So one of the things is across the board, COVID was a really big setback in general for everything, but really to the progress being made to all of these goals. And if you go to their website, they have a really great, website, surprisingly, but all of these goals you can click on. So we'll say zero hunger, and they will have different targets and indicators. So they give a great overview. They have targets and indicators that really define specifically what it means to have a social impact according to this sustainable development goal. So if I am a social entrepreneur and I want to impact, hunger, this is going to be the sustainable development goal that is relevant to my business. And as a business, I am going to try and meet the targets and indicators that the UN has set forth. I just view that as an easy way to try and set impact metrics as a company, depending on what you're trying to do. Obviously, in my line of work, this climate action piece is going to be likely the most relevant, but there's sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption. So my work tends to touch on, multiple areas of the sustainable development goals. And then something like sustainable agriculture is going to touch close to every one of these sustainable development goals, and sustainable food systems in particular. So again, won't spend too much time there, but it's a really great website. And if I'm a social entrepreneur, I'm going to look here to say, okay, if I want my business to have a true social or environmental impact, I'm going to look at what the UN says these are the goals for a society. The next tool outside of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is going to be kind of B Corp certification. And there's a lot of pros and cons here, but really at the high level, B Lab is the nonprofit network that is administering these certifications to businesses. What they're really doing is, creating standards, policies, tools, and programs that are shifting behavior, culture, and structural underpinnings of capitalism, which is a dramatic way of saying, we're going to help define what it means to run a good business, right? It is only for for-profit companies. So again, there's nonprofits doing really incredible work. I am a for-profit company that wants to also make an impact. So triple bottom line, whatever jargon they want to use, and B Lab is going to help define what that looks like and create the standards for that. Secondarily, they're obviously doing the B Corp certifications. And these are for companies meeting really high standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. And then third, they're finding ways to mobilize all these companies that are going to be certified as B Corp towards collective community action to, address different needs. So when it comes to the standards of a B Corp certification, there's different impact areas. So workers, are you treating your employees well? The environment speaks for itself. Are you going to harm the environment through your work? Customers, you're not delivering products or services that are harmful. The community that you reside in, understanding that you're also part of a larger community. And probably the most interesting piece is this stakeholder governance. So governance dealing with kind of the transparency as a company. But the difference is when you apply to be B Corp certified, I think you have 2 years to transition to a benefit corporation as a legal entity. And what's interesting is that, that is where you become legally accountable to these stakeholders, right? These are not companies that say, I really want to do well. I want to treat my employees right. I want to be an active community member and give back. All of that is fine and well. And there's companies that actually, do that. It's not a performance piece. But when you become a benefit corporation, you are legally held accountable to all of these stakeholders compared to shareholders, like a traditional for-profit business. One of the things that makes that really hard, a couple things. One is there's really not an effort to police the transition. You could get your B Corp certification, and if you don't transition to a benefit corporation, which again is that legal accountability piece, there's really not a lot of structure in place to police that. And secondarily, as a business owner, that pesky thing called fiduciary responsibility. So making companies on behalf of your shareholders, and you're constantly battling, making money for your shareholders with, making that impact. So B Lab is a great resource to, again, try and define what it means to be a great social business. They keep on revising their standards. And if you wanted to kind of know where you were as a for-profit social venture, their assessment is free. And I think to be certified, you need to get an 80 out of like 200 points or something like that. And you can find their standards. And again, I won't take time on it because I think we're running low on time, but they do have the standards listed here on their website. So again, if I'm a social entrepreneur and I want to have not only a business that is achieving kind of these high level goals, but I want to run a business that treats my employees well, treats my community well, I might look to B Corp or B Lab as a source to try and get those impact metrics for my company. Okay. Last but not least, ecosystem collaboration. And as I mentioned, I'm really going to focus on two high-level challenges that we face. Yes, Sophia.
And so I guess just one quick question on the B Corp and Benefit Corp. So would you say that it feels like you were saying, it's sort of being legally responsible for these things is obviously it's going to be more expensive. And so I'm wondering, is the benefit really, again, to sort of attract those funding opportunities to say hey, we're really, taking these things seriously, or is it more from a perhaps like a consumer, that a consumer or a customer would say, oh, like I can trust this company, trust this business because they're certified, or is it both?
It's you know what, it's a really great question, Sophia, and it's one that I've noticed for B2C companies that, direct to consumer types of companies. I think it is that point of like, oh, I trust this company, or as a consumer, I feel aligned with this company. That's your Ben and Jerry's, that's your Patagonia, that is your,
Mhm.
there's a lot of examples of I want to be a responsible consumer and support companies that treat their employees well, treat the environment well, et cetera, et cetera. Where I don't see as much value and where I've seen that challenge of kind of B Corp certification adoption is in B2B business models. So to your point, the other business, it really is much more transactional. They're not kind of getting the PR benefit of
Right.
being a B Corp certification. And I even had a great conversation with a local CEO of a engineering and construction company who is, extremely mindful of these types of issues, but she just builds it into her operation without actually pursuing the certification, which
Mhm.
again, it has really great intentions and she's a person who follows through on it. But she is not held legally accountable, which as a CEO is good, right? You don't want to add liability and add
Right.
that legal accountability. So it makes a lot of sense B2B. B2C, I think it adds, like potentially responsible consumers might purchase or go out of their way to purchase a product from a B Corp certified brand compared to a non B Corp certified brand. But it is a challenge.
Yep, that makes sense. It happened a lot in the ESG consulting space where just the UN, those metrics use them all the time to help people like structure and base the reports, but like that legal jump is like a different thing. But I do think there's such a lack of transparency, like as a consumer, right? There's so much greenwashing, there's so much that goes on in that space. It's very confusing. And so it's a very cool thing to learn about that last piece of it that like actually makes it real.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, an awesome question. And, it's something that I want to believe in. And like you said, there are some businesses where it just really might not make sense. But I am seeing, observing that B2C companies in particular might benefit or even get a boost in revenue with that B Corp certification. But B2B companies just really don't see that value and they only see it as a liability.
Yep. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, kind of like I said, last but not least, this ecosystem collaboration piece and the challenges associated. So if anybody knows the startup world at all, startups touch so many different areas, right? They might belong to an incubator, participate in 4, 5, 10, 15 accelerator programs. They have other types of support programs like the one that I'm an associate director of that gets to work collaboratively across all of those because it makes sense, right? They have limited resources and they need to be as resourceful as possible. But it's just kind of, if you want to be a successful entrepreneurial program, you do not have any choice but to be collaborative. So for example, a lot of companies ask me, I'm in this accelerator, can I participate in your program too? Like if I said no, we'd have nobody in our program. So, the answer is yes, and you have to be collaborative if you want to support startups for a living. And that comes across, two really big challenges that we're facing. This is just in innovation and entrepreneurship in general. But as I said, layer that on with kind of the impact metrics piece that social innovators really struggle with. So the first is a lack of standardization. So there are different data labels across the ecosystem. This is adding confusion and it really reduces data integrity. So a couple quick examples of that, TRL and CRL levels. So companies asking for technical readiness levels. And just to show kind of how silly this is. So first, our program by NYSERDA are not allowed to serve companies above a certain level. And there's super ambiguous language around that. They even said, so I want you to assign a technical readiness level to each startup that comes through your program. Now, some of the startups have more than one technology that they're working on at different stages of readiness level. How do I assign one readiness level to a startup that has multiple technologies? We can't. And we again, asking across the ecosystem, nobody knows how to do it. There is not one standard. So NASA has a technical readiness level. So there is no one standard of what that actually means. Commercial readiness level or CRL level is even worse. Super ambiguous language. I think CRL 9 in one of the many standards says widespread market adoption. So where that becomes a challenge, again, if you go back to the self-reporting that programs like mine and many of the people in the ecosystem have, a lot of startups love to inflate their actual level of anything. So I get a lot of people saying, I'm at CRL9, I have widespread market adoption with $1 million in revenue. Now, I'm not knocking $1 million in revenue, but in the realm of business, that is certainly not widespread market adoption. It's also dumb because now I can't help you. So just examples of the frustrations that there is no one person that says, here is what it means to have a technical readiness level. People have different numbers of levels. It's wild. So stages of commercialization are similar. So in the startup world, you might be in ideation stage, incubation stage, acceleration stage, or growth stage, scaling stage, whatever synonym you want to use. But there is no real stopgap as to which stage you're in when. Some people switch incubation and acceleration stages. So as a company, as you're moving forward, we don't have a common language to say, oh, ideation stage companies need this level of support, these types of programs, this type of funding, acceleration, incubation, scaling, etc. Right? So there's no common language of what that actually means. So we're all just kind of doing our best. And which goes to these funding stages. So going to private capital, if I'm going to be a social entrepreneur for a for-profit social enterprise, I might ask my friends and family first. I don't have wealthy friends or family, so that'll probably be a super quick funding round for me, but some people have money there. Then I'll move into a pre-seed stage, a seed stage raise, and then a traditional series A, B, C, etc. So pre-seed and seed has always been weird. It's usually around, developing your technologies, validating your business model. And when you're getting a series A, you're in early commercialization and you need that capital to scale quickly. So that's that hockey stick growth that you would expect from a high growth startup. But now those funding stages are even weirder. So typically a series A might be between $3 and $5 million. Now we're seeing pre-seed and seed stages at like 10 million. So the investor community is just like, I don't know what stage we're at. I don't know what it means. I don't know why you need $10 million when you don't even have a piece of technology. All of this to say, there is a real lack of standardization across the ecosystem in terms of how we define different data points to even be able to track with any kind of accuracy. And as part of that, we're really unsure of who is the entity that is going to step in and say, actually, you guys, here is what this means. Here is the standard. Is it, for us, NYSERDA is our funder, but like they shouldn't be creating standards across the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. So we've been having this conversation a lot between different accelerators, incubators, and we don't know who that one person is. Is it the president? I don't know, you guys. So any thoughts there? We don't know who's supposed to step in and fix this. And number two is this challenge around data ownership. So really, who gets to claim and take credit for certain data within the ecosystem, which, as I mentioned, is already, there's a bunch of challenges to getting this data at all. But where we run into is the funding implications, right? So we have certain startups, and because this startup is in an incubator for accelerators, in my program, we have to report all to our funders, those different client-driven metrics that I said. But correlation is not causation, right? So no program can say with any accuracy if the startup was able to achieve certain results purely by participation in their program. And that's what you see certain programs trying to do, because our funders are saying, prove to me that I gave you X many dollars and your program was able to leverage that money and they were able to raise $5 million. So some programs say that, but there's no way you can say that with any accuracy and try and parse out who gets to claim that data from any particular startup. So again, we're winging it, you guys, but we're having a good time. So those are really the two big challenges I see with ecosystem collaboration. And as we close out the day, some takeaways, and again, just reiterating the role of data in social innovation and entrepreneurship as it relates to funding. Accurate, fast, and current data leads to funding, and then funders tend to drive the metrics that we track and build into our operation. What we're seeing is that these metrics tend to be the easier to track metrics compared to the harder impact metrics that would show, are these companies actually having the impact on the social and environmental impact they want to have? For operations, operational excellence needs to be built into an operation for a startup, as well as the programs that support those startups. And then for social innovators, I recommend kind of that B Corp, as well as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as guiding impacts to try and create those impact metrics. Because again, your funders are not going to really ask that of you because they don't know how. And then last but not least, there's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to ecosystem collaboration. Greater standardization and clarity of ownership are two big issues that we are still actively trying to solve as a community. So with that, I really want to again thank you for having me. I'm happy to have any questions or discussion, and I'd also love to hear from you if you have anything that you'd want to discuss, any recommendations. I have my email and my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect, and it's really been a pleasure.
Miss Caitlin, I know we're a little over on time. If you don't mind, if there are questions that folks have.
Yeah, do we have a few minutes or?
Yeah, I'm here.
So thank you so much. That was very interesting. Touched on a lot of interesting things, especially, of course, I'm kind of attracted to this idea of the impact metrics, coming from data science background. And I actually just attended at MIT the Women in Data Science conference, and there was somebody. It's just totally feels like it is in this world where she did these really high impact and high funding social projects and this was her exact question of like, how do you actually prove the results of your social impact program with data? And that's like not an easy question, because a lot of times there's so many like ethical considerations too, where you can't have the ideal experimental groups that you might want to have, because if you're aware of somebody who's facing hunger challenges, like you're ethically obligated to help resolve that issue, right? So it's a super interesting field, and I feel like data science definitely could help in this area of like, but you need a lot of data.
Yeah.
So I guess that's sort of would be my question is, do you find that your startups that you're working with like truly have enough data to even propose that question of like, okay, yes, you have an idea of maybe how you'd set up your experiment, but to build a model to like show, right, you would need a lot.
Absolutely not. So
Okay,
again,
yeah.
even the simplicity of greenhouse gas emission reduction potential, right? So
Right.
this is to get into our program showing that you have a technology that could potentially mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. It's made up, you guys. Like, people are just trying their best to create these numbers. There are a couple of tools online. We give them those tools, but at the end of the day, it is the best example of a guesstimate. So Sophia, I'd love to connect with you offline. I'd love to know who that speaker was.
Yes, I was just about to. I'm gonna put her name in the chat because she has some really interesting papers like on this topic. Yeah, so of how she basically addresses it, not specifically for climate, but I think how she sets up like basically her experimental design like could help. But yeah, the greenhouse gas emission. I worked for a primarily an accounting firm, right? So we're trying to do accounting around that, and it's really, really hard because the data is just not there yet. So yeah, it's a little bit of a mess, but it's a worthwhile cause to try to figure out. Like, I think it is possible. It's just
no, it's there. It's just, it's almost the same challenge of like, who's gonna put the stamp on it, right? Who's gonna say this is how we're gonna measure this? So I think there's a lot, if you are, like you said, a data scientist, data engineers, this is an area. It's also the reason that impact investors are really struggling. So they're just again, they can measure money, but when it comes to funding startups, traditional funders might want a 10x return on their investment. How do you balance that with but they're making this kind of impact? So that's the reason impact investing really has not succeeded, because they don't have those metrics, and they're much more difficult to say, I know the startup that I invested in is succeeding because of this data. And it's not just, they're earning money, so therefore they're doing good. That's much easier to look at. So yeah, I'll keep a lookout for that name because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah.
Gerald, thank you for all these comments. I did not see any of them as I was presenting, but I see you. And yeah, I'd love to connect. I'll actually write your name down and let's connect, and I can follow up on any of the things that I had brought up, like the predictive index. I see the social personality psychology researcher, which is super interesting. If you want to talk about how to better involve EQ in our team building process, that's another conversation that we're having now. So yeah, I think a lot of your backgrounds would be really valuable for both the startups and the programs in that social innovation space.
I wonder if a lot of the startup people are in the first half of their career, or they're towards the end of their career and they want to build something using what they've learned.
It's a really cool mix. So we have bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, fresh out of their PhD programs. So a lot of the deep technologists that I work with developed a piece of technology with their professor in their PhD programs. Their professor says, I'm cool and tenured, like you run with it. And then they're going to transfer technology out of their university and then take it to commercialize. But I do have people who had long careers in different areas, and now they want to, they want to start their own business, they want to commercialize. So it really, it's a playground for everybody, but we see a great mix there.
I wonder if there's an element of doctors are the worst patients, where these tech startups don't do a good job building a good data ecosystem for themselves.
I believe it. And again, I think it's because, like most of the technologists who have PhDs, their knowledge is very deep in one specific area. And if it's not that, it's really, that's where, programs like ours that we have 120 or 120 plus entrepreneurs in residence who are coming in to be their business brain, right? So they have a very specific skill set, and then they have no business acumen to actually commercialize that technology. So that's where, again, support or ecosystem is going to help them figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Caitlin, this isn't so much a question, but just something, just like in general, that I was thinking about as we were going through, like talking about like survey responses and kind of like I don't know, like baking in, and like you said, like there's not just like one authority of like, oh, this is exactly the framework or the metrics. It's like there's good organizations to kind of base that off of, but that whole, trying to capture human emotion or bias or, all these different factors and still try and get, the data that, like you said, like you guys need to be able to, support different programs and say like, hey, this is, this decision was made on this. It's just kind of interesting because that's obviously like a more open-ended part of data in and of itself.
Yeah, and I know enough to know that actually creating a really effective survey is extraordinarily challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that I certainly didn't create that survey. You know what I mean?
So,
like
yeah.
I'm asking point blank, but in addition to the completion rates, it really is like it's not accounting for that, a lot of that variability.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm asking for data that they don't necessarily want to give me. But it is really a challenge. And again, is that even the data that we should be caring about? Because it's not showing, are you satisfied with this program? It's just, I'm asking you if you raised money last month, right? Because that's what my funder wants to know.
Yeah.
And I also, because we can barely get surveys completed as it is, I can't then add on another half of the survey about impact metrics, because they would get mad and then they're less satisfied because I'm asking them too many questions, and those aren't the questions our funder asks. So forget it. I'm just going to ask you what our funder wants to know. So it's just, I'm seeing this come up again and again, partially with humor, but partially truly. We have companies that are trying to help New York State reach certain goals and milestones. Obviously, we've heard a lot about kind of these climate or international climate conferences where we're not doing well. So, there is a real sense of urgency. Like we want to actually get these companies into the market and commercializing. And we just don't have the data to show, is it going well? Right. So I know we have bad data. I don't even know if we're asking for the right data. We have bad data on potentially the wrong data, which is not great. But it's what we have, and it's we're going to continue to approach it from a continuous improvement mindset with wonderful people like you all who can potentially help us to figure out how to do that better. But it is a conversation that a lot of people are having and are very interested in finding the answers. So Sophia, I see that name of that speaker. So I'm constantly looking for people, and I will connect to other people who are having that conversation. So I got a lot of value out of this this as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say yours clapping. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. Really appreciate it. And I think we all like appreciated the thought-provoking conversation on all the different topics involved with innovation of in and of itself, and how everything kind of relates. So appreciate it.
Not a problem. Again, it was a real pleasure. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and if I can ever be helpful, please do reach out.
You have one of the
Thanks.
most interesting roles from anyone that I've seen at these speeches, talks.
That's
All good,
awesome.
Robert.
I take that as a compliment. It really is interesting work. So getting to share that is a real joy. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks. Everyone have a good
Thank you so
night.
much, Ashley.